Wow, hello. Me, okay, me. Okay, you guys. Good, we've got everyone here. Except all the people who aren't here, because it's early in Spain. Really early in Spain. I'm not even Spanish myself, so I wasn't out until 5 a.m. like I think at least two of you were. Yeah, do I have, well, I can't see my notes here on the monitors, so I'll have to look at the screen, I think, just a bit. Yeah, so I like to talk about the future these days because I think the future is, well, it's a bit of a question, isn't it? I mean, when you think about how far Magento has come, I think we have, I think we, everyone's just here for my amusement, really. I mean, this early in the morning? No. When you think about how far Magento has come, I mean, I know I came from humble beginnings myself. I think a lot of you also, your story with Magento is not unlike mine, which is that, you know, a lot of us have built entire careers on the back of this beast. Now, if you're new here, I mean, that's also amazing. I'd like to talk to you because these days I want to learn how people enter this ecosystem. But in the Magento world, there are a lot of us, we've been around 10 years. I mean, we didn't even think 10 years into the future when we were doing things 10 years ago. So any talk about future discussions, though, like this has to, we have to look at where we are today, which I have to remind myself of the numbers. So let's start. So we know we have over 100,000 stores online. It's actually, the number I think is a lot bigger, but that's kind of the challenge of open source. Right? We have no idea. People can use our software without us actually knowing who they are. So we have people working in this space, and I have another number that kind of gets into that detail, but we have people working in this space who we just don't know who they are. And it's a really interesting position for a product company to be in, right? So 100,000 stores, we have well over 100,000 ecosystem members. I think that also is a pretty low estimate. I think we probably have more ecosystem members than we have stores. And I'll tell you my logic on this. I feel like it takes more than one person to get a store online and then to run that store. But again, this is one of the things that we don't know. So it's actually my mission in the next year to really dig into this ecosystem and find out just how many people we have. I won't find everybody, but I want to find them all, and as much as I can, and then learn everything I can about them. I think that's really important. Okay? So, a couple big numbers up there. $150 billion a year. That's what this business is. $150 billion worth of merchandise volume goes through Magento code every year. So we hired a couple of analysts to kind of dig in and do a couple of research projects for us. The 150 billion GMV, we think that's actually kind of conservative, but that's the number we go with. So that's an important story. But more important is the $5 billion number, right? So who here is in the Magento business? Okay. I think it might be more. Who here is just terrified to put your hand up at an event at 9 a.m.? Good. That's who I'm really talking to. So $5 billion a year is the business of being in the Magento business, right? So that's our service economy. That's what we call it, service economy. And one of the things that makes me sometimes smile with just total pride, and sometimes gives me indigestion and absolute terror, is that number. Because that means that Magento, Adobe, we extract from this ecosystem just a really small percentage of that $5 billion sort of volume of money that flows around this software. It's a really interesting position to be in. For me, I think, for us, I think our orientation to that number is we have the most mean, premier responsibility, I'm not sure the right word, but our most important thing to do is to look after that $5 billion of business that you all are in, right? The fact that we get to take any money out of that, that's actually, that's our pleasure, that's our honor, right? So when we do well by you, we all succeed. When we make a mistake, well, then we hurt a lot of people. That's what that number means. Now, one of the investments that we've made recently has been community engineering. This is how we work with our ecosystem to get the product built. That 50% new lines of code, it also could look like a bragging statistic, but to be honest, this is the way we should have been building Magento all along. Back in the early days, and I remember the early days because I started as a Magento developer in 2008 at a small company at the time. Back in the day, if you wanted to contribute to Magento, it seems absolutely silly now, but what you had to do was you had to go to a web page, download a document, print it off, sign it, and then fax it. Send a fax to someone in LA who would then say, okay, cool, you've signed our agreement, now you can contribute. This is actually not how open source is supposed to work, but it wasn't until, honestly, 2014, 2015 that we really started to engage on the open source front. And it wasn't until 2017 that we started community engineering, basically an entire group of architects and engineers whose job it is to facilitate the work that our ecosystem can do. So this is, I think, one of the most important things that we've done as a company to help things out for all of us. And to be honest, I think it would have been amazing if we had done this when we were building Magento 2 in the first place. I think we might have both gained some insight and then prevented maybe one or two missteps. Okay? And then on that note, I mean, I should underscore that that we as a company, we invest millions of dollars a year. I mean, and that's just for me to travel. It's a joke for those of you who know me. I don't travel that well. But no, I mean, literally millions of dollars go into the ecosystem every year. And of course, we get a lot of value back from that. I mean, every line of code that we get is a line of code that we don't have to write. But it is a line of code that we have to process. Like, we have to facilitate that. But one of the points that I like to make is that, you know, as a product company, we are, you know, we're okay at building a product, but as a member of this ecosystem, the best thing that we can do is actually take the work of developers, right, the ones who are actually out there building sites for merchants, encountering those nuances, those rough corners, and take the code that they write and put it back into our code, because that code tends to be more well-informed, more robust, and more extensible. Because at the end of the day, we have to build a platform for everyone, and when we get that input from the ecosystem, I think that's us at our best. Okay? All right, I'll go on now. What is the next slide? Okay, good. I know this slide because I wrote it. This is kind of not really a compare and contrast, but sort of like, let's look on the left side and compare it to the corresponding bullet on the right side. So recently, I remember when Ignacio invited me out to meet Magento Spain. I think it was 2013. I actually still wasn't working for Magento at that point. I was just, you know, like you, part of the ecosystem. And when I came out, actually, I met the next speaker, Kathleen Klaus, at 4 a.m. because she had to tell us to shut up because we were all just being loud outside. But actually, Kathleen, I think, deserves a round of applause when she comes up, because I feel like she has kept this ecosystem going through the times of eBay, and you know, has been basically the representative of Magento in EMEA. But basically, there were only a couple people coming out to events back then. Now, you'll find that if you go to an event in EMEA, it's almost like 50-50, kind of a joke. 50-50 Magento employees or Adobe employees to ecosystem members, right? It's a really cool change in our relationship. I think because we had, we benefited from the ecosystem for so long without actually having to put too much investment in it. Basically, this ecosystem was self-sustaining. But, the reality is, if you want to do business, I'm sure many of you are in business here in Spain, and if you want to do business here, well, yeah, you need to be here, right? The Spanish way of doing business is definitely not the American way of doing business, or the German way of doing business, or the French way of doing business. So we've invested a lot of money and time into the countries here in EMEA. And you see this kind of reflects the reality of where business has gone since 10 years ago. Many of the companies that we're working with are cross-border. Many of them are employing development teams sort of not based in the country where they are. I mean, it's just a reality of our business that it is a multinational business, and fortunately, we've been able to put investment towards that. So I think that gives us a lot of product insight and has helped us learn exactly what features we should build. And I have a slide coming up where I'll talk about exactly what that means. But basically, the more that we're out present with our community, the better we're able to prioritize the features that we're building. Now, it's your job as an ecosystem to chime in on these priorities, and I'll show you how in just a moment. Speaking of which, actually, we are now, I think, more empowered as an ecosystem to do what we need to do than we've ever been before. I hope that makes sense, right? I know a lot of people were really concerned when Adobe came along. I was kind of among that crowd. And I got the call, by the way, 5 minutes before it was announced to the world, because that's how those kind of deals have to work. But yeah, I had just landed for Meet Magento Italy last year, and I got the call. I mean, it's not often that my boss at the time would actually ask for a phone call with me, and so it was maybe 2 or 3 outcomes for a phone call like this. But yeah, the news that we were being acquired by Adobe was a little concerning, because I came into Magento from the eBay days, and if you were around back in 2012, 2013, 2014, you might remember the eBay days. I'm not saying eBay was wrong with how with their strategy around Magento. Actually, yeah, I am. They were completely wrong. But the Magento community persisted nonetheless. But the cool thing is, since that time, bless you, we have had a chance. We've had a chance as a company to kind of grow into this role. And one of the most comforting things that happened is shortly after the announcement, before we were supposed to even be talking with each other, I started seeing Adobe employees show up at events. And it was really neat, because most of the employees that I were meeting, they were there for 10, 15 years, right? Which is amazing in a company these days. Even more amazing, they had mostly been acquired. So they came in through an acquisition. They hadn't sought out Adobe, but they'd ended up at Adobe, and they stayed. Now, Adobe's strategy has been to essentially let Magento do what Magento does. We're seeing a bit more velocity these days in terms of the integration, but really, Adobe spent a lot of time letting us figure things out. And then, I'd say even more so, has spent a lot of time and money investing in our connection with the ecosystem, right? So it's not just all those Magento employees who are coming out to the events, it's also people from Adobe who are coming out. We had VPs at Imagine this last year that partly, their presence there partly informed the decision to have Imagine again and to make it part of Summit this year, or this coming year, right? So these kind of connections are important, and they show just how much control I think we have as an ecosystem. We are continuing to invest in our in our empowerment of merchants to have insights into who their customers are. In fact, that's our entire product strategy, is to make sure that merchants are in control of the customer experience, right? Basically, merchants know, in this day and age, how their customers are experiencing their brand. There is no greater potential. There is no more difficult a challenge than that, right? So consumers are more empowered than they've ever been to understand, to experience a brand, right? They have control. They dictate how they want to encounter a brand. It could be Facebook. I mean, I haven't been much of a clothes buff, but ever since Philip Jackson got on stage with really bright orange shoes, like, I have to admit, like, I don't walk past a shoe store without just peeking to see what kind of orange stock they have. And then sometimes this leads me to go online and look at something, and then, like you all, if anyone here is on Instagram or Facebook, I mean, once you hit a website of a major brand, guarantee you, you will see that brand's ads in your feed. And that kind of experience, it's a little scary for, like a Gen Xer, but it's comfortable, it's familiar to people now. But for merchants to understand, like, and control how consumers are experiencing them, like, throughout the day, like, that's a really tough problem to solve for. That's what we're working on at Adobe. And we've had several product announcements about that. And my esteemed colleague, Jason Woosley, should be here later to talk more about that. So on this slide, I have, my thoughts for the future. I have no idea how much time I have left. My thoughts for the future. I feel like I should sit down. Here we go. So, gather around, kids. My thoughts for the future. First, a disclaimer. Well, two disclaimers. Do not make any stock purchases or sales based on my thoughts for the future. Also, I actually don't ever submit my slides to Adobe's marketing team or to Magento's marketing team because, frankly, it's my job, I think, to shoot from the hip and to be as honest and straightforward with you as I can be. So, with those two major disclaimers in place, I want to talk about where I think things are headed. And again, I mentioned already that several people have come to me since the acquisition, and they're wondering, like, where is this business going? Is this still going to be a business that I'm in a few years? 5, 10 years out, I don't really have a crystal ball that works that well, but in the near term, so in the next, 3 to 4 years, yeah, absolutely, it's a business for you. We have absolute control in everything that we're doing. So I think Adobe is building a commerce brand. It's a smart move for Adobe, right? They had all these parts and pieces that fit around the commerce story, and then they acquired the one product on the market that really facilitates, custom commerce. But, what does that mean for us? I think, on the one hand, it does mean that we do have to fit into an overall, corporate strategy. Like a product strategy. Magento is now a product company, like a productized company. We were the whole story before we had a CEO. We don't have that anymore, right? We fit into a suite of solutions. But to this day, I think if you're paying attention to the announcements coming out about Magento, we have the upper hand, right? I don't think it's necessarily important that it's a vertical relationship, but absolutely our leadership at Adobe is looking to this ecosystem to help guide the future, to help shape this story. Basically, whatever we want to do, whatever capacity we want to function in, that's going to inform the decisions that Adobe makes, right? So I know Adobe's going to continue to invest in this ecosystem. It's been repeated time and again that the Magento purchase was a lot of that value there. That $1.7 billion purchase, really a lot of that value was this ecosystem, right? It's our biggest competitive advantage as a product. So believe me, you are in control. Okay. I feel like Grandpa Ben's sermon is over. Now, how to get involved. So the ways that you can be involved, and you should be involved. And by the way, did you get the message that you should be involved? Just to be clear? Okay, good. It's still early, I know. We have our forums. Our forums are now translated into 6 or 8 different languages. I don't know, I've forgotten because it took us 2 years to get that done. Because any of you who've ever worked for a big company can appreciate the challenges of purchasing. But our communities are run by our very capable community manager, Sherry. So we have forums, we have dev docs. That's our documentation, which those of you remember from the Magento 1 days, our documentation story is 1,000 times better, almost infinitely better, because we didn't have documentation back then. We have Stack Exchange, the Magento Stack Exchange website. That's something that I helped create way back in the day along with the ecosystem before I joined Magento. So developers will know this well. Copy, paste, problem solved. We have a couple things I want to point out under GitHub. So GitHub is, I like to call it the social network with a coding problem. But this is where you can actually interact directly with the people at Magento who are sort of help shaping the story of Magento's future. Right? So of course we have the Magento 2 code base. You can go there, you can find issues that you can participate in, whether you're a coder or not. You can even just chime in to say like, hey, this is important to me. If you're a coder, then you can probably help fix some of those issues. And we groom that backlog of issues so that people know, like basically know how to start contributing. And the cool thing is, the help that we need, sometimes it's actually user-land help. So as a user, you can go in, like if you run a store in Magento and you're like, oh man, I've got this problem, you find that issue on our repository, you can actually just type in a simple comment that says, hey, I want to test this issue. And we will spin up an instance of Magento with the appropriate sort of configuration, and you can verify that issue for us. It's a great way to give back. There's a couple more places where you can learn about Magento's future, though. We have a backlog repository. This is where so github.com/magento/backlog. This is where we are sort of putting out there the things that we're thinking about building. You can chime in there. You can prioritize that for us. In fact, we're kind of relying on you to do that. But then we also have the architecture repository. And the architecture repository is our place to really tell you about product future. So my colleague Anton Krill is here. He's about this tall. He gets taller every time I see him. Very light blonde hair if you see him walking around. Now he's Ukrainian, but don't let that scare you. He's a really nice guy. It really is too early in the morning for jokes, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, good. Good, you have a pulse. So Anton is actually quite smart. The good thing at Magento is that I'm not the smartest person in the room, ever. This is a good thing for all of us, trust me. I'm probably not even the smartest person on the stage right now. Yeah, good, the jokes are working. But Anton leads architecture, and the architecture story at Magento is interesting. But I'd say actually exposing our architectural decisions and discussions to the rest of the world is the thing that has kept us from being the open source company that we always wanted to be. So back in 2014, we used to just throw our code up on GitHub. We used it basically as sort of file storage. But now, we make our decisions in public with you all. I mean, mostly it's us talking to ourselves, but we document those discussions on the architecture repository. And you all can chime in on that. You all can say, like, hey, this is a really bad idea. In fact, that just happened a couple months ago, I think. Alan Storm, who those of you who have been around for a long time will remember, kind of the grandfather of the Magento ecosystem, he sort of saw something we were doing on architecture and asked Twitter if this was a good idea, and that prompted a thorough discussion from a lot of people. And some of that discussion found its way back to the architecture repository. So literally, that was an example of us sort of saying, like, hey, we're thinking about doing something, and the ecosystem saying, like, hey, that's a terrible idea. And we were able to take that feedback essentially in real time and apply it to our strategy. Now, the story with Magento 2.5, 2.6, I mean, we're looking at a couple years worth of evolution that's going to happen to get there. But it will be a much better product because of the decision to make our architectural decisions like in public. So that's one really important way to get involved. So I encourage, whether you are a developer or maybe you employ developers, I would encourage you to be involved, to get them involved in the architecture repository. Okay? Let's see, what else do I have up here? Okay. I'll come back to Magento Association in a second. The Innovation Lab. This is another project that I helped create along with my colleague Peter Sheldon, who's our head of strategy. Innovation Lab. Who here is familiar with Innovation Lab? Okay. Entirely not enough hands. So seriously, one of the things that we're super stoked about always is how often this ecosystem does entirely unexpected things with Magento, creating new shopping experiences, sort of challenging the paradigm of how consumers work with brands, like how they relate to brands. And Innovation Lab is actually our place to highlight those things. Essentially, this stuff is by design is not productized offering, right? So it has to be something that's in place, aspirational, and impacts the customer experience on Magento 2. What we do with Innovations Lab is we basically have, every few months, we open up a submission window, you submit, and then we go through kind of a rigorous cycle of internal evaluation, and we pick 3, 4, 5 innovations. And then we help you, if you're an innovator, we help you tell the story of your innovation. Basically, we'll help you with some of the marketing, and then we'll invite you out to the trade shows where you can kind of be present with Magento at our booth and hopefully impress merchants that are just discovering Magento for the first time. It's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of because it just highlights everything that we do. I'll give a shout out to both Mage2 TV. This is my old colleague Vinay. It's actually not so much participatory, but it is a great way to actually get some real experienced insight into how Magento works. And then, of course, Twitter is where we have our discussions. Now, I have to tell the story for a moment about the Magento Association. So when I talk about the future of Magento, I see Adobe increasingly have to hand over more and more power for Magento to the ecosystem. I just think that the Adobe story, the Adobe Commerce story, is one where Adobe establishes itself as a proper, commerce steward. Essentially, Adobe will, through Magento, through the Magento acquisition and Marketo, and through some of the existing facilities at Adobe, will empower kind of the next generation of commerce. But I think that over time, it's going to have to change its relationship with Magento. And I think that change, or the future capacity for change, is encapsulated by the Magento Association. So I'm on the board of the Magento Association. And this is a long-standing tradition of open source software, open source language, being run by external, like nonprofit organizations. I'm on the board because Magento paid for the whole thing to get started. So basically, yes, my board seat was purchased. But we only have one board seat. We are basically a community, independent nonprofit that is here for essentially your interests. So I encourage each of you to go fill out the very short Google form at that URL, magentoassociation/join, and become a member. Right now, it's the bargain price of free. I'm not sure it will always be that way. See what I did there? That was soft close. I'm not really much of a salesman, but I think we can all agree that it's a good thing I'm not actually running the business side of this business. But no, seriously, going forward, I think Magento Association is the best chance that we all have as members of this ecosystem, of this community, to have our voices heard by the people at Adobe. That's why I would like to have each of you involved. And we should be sending out a survey in the next couple of weeks to, like I was saying earlier, to really dig in and help understand this ecosystem even better. And it's through that discovery that will move things forward. All right, I think that is about it. Let me see, inspirational quotes. Yeah. So I thought about this. Recently, I've been waking up with smart ideas, I think. I don't know. Yeah, probably. But the other day, or the other month, I woke up with this. Literally, it was just going through my head as I woke up. It's kind of like a shower thought, but I wasn't in the shower. But essentially, one of the things that I've learned, I'm so glad that I got my start at a place like Blue Acorn, where we focused on the merchant relationship, because it really informed everything that I've done since then as part of this ecosystem and as an employee at Magento. And that's basically, if we take it back, if we always pay attention to what the merchant needs, and then if we extend that a little bit, because we're all essentially consumers in this ecosystem, take care of the merchant needs, take care of each other, everything else works out. I've never, in all my travels, and I go to a lot of events that aren't Magento events, I've never in my life experienced anything like this community that we have here. It is absolutely gobsmackingly amazing. And if you're here because you've been here for a while, or you're here because you're just now encountering this thing called Magento. And I want to tell you, this is a really good place to be if you're in the commerce space, because we shape a lot of how commerce is going to work in the future, and we do it by working together. There's not a single person in this room that made their destiny independent of Magento. So if you're new here, I'd say get involved, get started with your Magento story. It's really an amazing story. So please, yes, be involved. Absolutely, we need your participation now more than ever. And that's it for me. 5 minutes? Good. I know it's early. It's early in Spain for questions. But I'm curious if you have any questions. Go ahead and shout them out. I don't have a microphone, but I'll repeat them for the camera. Karen, thank you for volunteering. No. No, it's early. No, who has a question? I know someone has a question. You can ask in Spanish, too. I speak not enough Spanish to understand, but someone will translate for me. ¿Preguntas? No? Ah, bien. Oh, Slava, totally not a paid participant.
What can you tell about the future of Magento events?
Oh, the future of Magento events. I could tell more than I will tell, mostly because I like being employed. No, so I think some decisions have been made about it, but I think also, just like at Imagine this year, I think Adobe really actually wanted to make the event a bit more Adobe. And those of us, again, who are around for the acquisition of, and the spin out from eBay with eBay Enterprise, we said, you know what? Maybe we should leave the event nice and orange with lots of Magento logos. So I think, events will evolve like Magento has evolved into being a member of a bigger product family, one that has an Adobe logo. But I think also our feedback will sort of inform the future of events in terms of, we just had Magento Live Europe in Amsterdam. I know a few of you were there. It was nothing short of incredible. I actually didn't really go to the after party myself because I'm getting old. But those who did, and had also been to Imagine said it was actually even better than Imagine. So I think, Adobe, as far as I know, doesn't have commerce-focused events, as far as I know. But I think these kind of events are tremendously important because basically when we get this ecosystem together to connect, we do a couple of things really well. Basically, we facilitate business. And a lot of that business, again, if you go back to those numbers that I was talking about, a lot of that business is not money that we make ourselves, but it enriches the ecosystem. And the other thing that we do is we impress the hell out of new merchants. So there were a couple of employees. On my way in, actually, the day after the after party, there were no fewer than 4 people who said to me, that was better than Imagine. That was an amazing party, which is important. But most importantly, a couple of our employees overheard a couple of merchants just talking amongst themselves saying, can you believe the passion that there is in this ecosystem? Essentially, we probably sold a couple of Magento, merchants on the Magento platform just on the strength of their experience of this ecosystem. So, we see events as an opportunity to make business happen. And again, our priority is a great metaphor. I think we're all familiar with pie, right? So there's our slice of the pie, small. Imagine a $5 billion pie. There's the Magento slice, pretty small. We as a company, we could focus on that slice. How do we make our slice bigger? But the way that we tend to think about it at Magento is let's just increase the size of the whole pie, right? Because if we increase the size of the whole pie, our slice gets proportionally bigger. Simple, tasty metaphor, but I like it because it really demonstrates the nature of our business. But for sure, thanks to the Magento Association, you'll continue to see Meet Magento functioning around the world. So I look forward to coming to, I'll announce it now. Ignacio might be upset with me if he's here. Meet Magento 2020. I think it'll be an amazing year here in Spain. Cool. All right, everyone, I thank you so much for spending so much time with me so early in the morning. I'm sorry for all the words. Hopefully my message got through, and hopefully my jokes were really, really funny. Now I'm going to go find some coffee for myself. Thank you all.